And of course, it would be useful to know the legal weight of this finding so that we know whether punitive actions will follow or actively contribute to limiting the use of spyware in Europe. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's a lot of questions. To begin with, the mandate of the inquiry committee runs until March, possibly until June. So no, this is only the picture of the situation at the moment, and we will continue our inquiry. That's obvious. As I said, in many cases we had to rely on sources other than government information, simply because governments refuse to share information with us. When it comes to Greece, I would think that there are a couple of things that the authorities can do. I understand it is in the discretion of the Prime Minister to lift the confidentiality on the cases of, let's say, legal interception, in particular of Mr. Androulakis and Mr. Koukakis. He could do that. He could shed light on that matter. The parliamentary or the Parliament could decide to lift confidentiality on the papers of the inquiry committee. So I think there's already a lot of information out there, official information that could be shared. So I don't know if by the time that we conclude our work, the inquiry in Greece will have been concluded. I don't know that. There's still, 4 to 7 months to go. But I also think that, this didn't... the revelations by Documento last weekend weren't the first revelations. This has been going on for a while. There have been complaints already last year. So I think the authorities, could have shown a slightly bigger sense of urgency in investigating. So I hope that now there is, I understand, an investigation by the general prosecutor, and I hope that will be done quickly. The problem is also when you're talking about facts. One thing that struck me was that there has been an inquiry or an investigation into Intellexa that consisted of a visit to the office of Intellexa. They have, if I understand correctly, verified 1 year of the accounts of Intellexa. They have not confiscated servers, computers, the administration. People have not been brought in for questioning. I imagine that by now any evidence that existed has disappeared. So isn't it a bit strange to say, well, the European Parliament has to rely on, public sources, if on the other hand the authorities go out of their way to make sure the evidence is not available anymore? And to be frank, this Parliament should have full powers of inquiry. We should have the right to summons people, to hear them under oath, and to get access to confidential documents. But we don't have those powers right now. And I'm actually quite proud that this Parliament is doing this inquiry with all the limited means that we have. And the fact that we're using public sources doesn't mean that the conclusions we draw are false. It only means that we can probably not prove it in court. It doesn't mean that it's not true. And I think there are enough pieces of the puzzle available by now to show there's a problem. And if I understand correctly, but correct me if I'm wrong, I understand that Mr. Mitsotakis has not denied the existence, the veracity of the list of 33, and there may be more to follow. He just says that the government had nothing to do with it, that it was an external actor. Well, we'll see. It's not a very plausible hypothesis, I think. But let's see what comes out of the investigations. But on the one hand, I understand the criticism and the frustration that we share about the non-availability of hard evidence. At the same time, I think that if you read the report and if you see how the different dots that we have connected, it does show a picture that's very, very difficult to deny. And I think it should be, let's say, an encouragement for the governments and the authorities to investigate. It should be a reason for them to allow parliamentary inquiries to be set up and not blocked and stonewalled. It should encourage governments to launch a police investigation. It should encourage governments to let Europol in and help the investigation. So rather than criticizing the European Parliament for at least trying to do something where the national governments are not doing it, I would say talk to the national governments and tell them to do their democratic duty.
Thank you. We are now exceeding our time slot and relying on the goodwill of our interpreters, so we have time for one more question. Maria Psaha, please, online.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me and see me maybe. I'm Maria Psara from the Greek newspaper Efsin, Efemerides Takton. So I have 1.5 question. Connecting the dots in Greece, how convinced are you that the Greek government is behind the surveillance? And how close was this system to the Prime Minister? And secondly, I read in your draft report that there are evidently politically motivated use of spyware. So I suppose that you don't share the government's argument that external actors or private citizens did the surveillance. Am I right? Thank you.
Well, have we got a smoking gun? No, we don't. But let's look at what we do know. We do know that spyware is sold mainly to governments. It is occasionally sold to individuals, but they have to be very, very rich because the stuff is incredibly expensive. So let's say that there is this individual, very, very rich individual behind it. I mean, somebody has to be seriously rich, not just a little bit a millionaire. No, you have to be almost a billionaire in order to be able to just pull this out of your pocket and pay for it. Then that person would have to have reasons, a motivation to surveil the people who are on the list, because the list has not been denied, that has not been pulled in question. So the list is real. So who would, we have to do a little bit of detective work here. Who would have the motive, the means, and the opportunity? Now look at the names on the list. It's clearly a political list. So who would have an interest? Which individual would have the money and the interest of surveilling these particular people? Then another element is that some of these people have also been under, let's say, official surveillance that has been recognized by the government. So is that a coincidence then that these people are also on the list? I mean, by way of elimination, you can sort of tick certain hypotheses off the list. And then, the hypothesis that I've heard of an individual or an outsider doesn't strike me as particularly plausible, to be honest. But again, unless we get access to confidential information, we will not find a smoking gun.
Thank you. And I'm afraid that concludes our press conference today, but thank you very much for everyone who was able to join us. Thank you and have a good afternoon.